So the ATF is coming out with a brand new rule, and this is going to get a lot of people. The question is going to be whether or not you're a gun dealer. And if you get it wrong, you're looking up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Because after all, who wants to pay off their student loans or house mortgage when they can pay the government, right? So guys, let's get into it. So if you know a thing or two about agency rulemaking, and keep in mind, there's over 400 agencies and sub-agencies out there in the United States. There's a reason why they call it the fourth estate. Then you know that they are not allowed to make new law. Their rules must be interpretive, not so much legislative. In other words, they are allowed to figure out whether or not, look, here's the boundaries set by statute. They're allowed to clarify kind of what do things mean, but they have to stay within the hue. They have to stay within the framework and structure of the legislation. So you may be asking yourself, what changed then? Why can the ATF, how can the ATF make a new rule? Well, the answer is the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which amended basically part of the definition, among other things, of what is a gun dealer. Now, guys, we have an amazing video that's going to be coming out in just a few days that's going to be going into all kinds of details about the statutory definitions that were modified, as well as all sorts of different tests about out there, whether or not you're going to be a dealer and when. So I won't belabor that in this video because I have a whole separate one coming on that. And also keep in mind, this is to let you know primarily that, look, there's a new rule coming. It's going to be coming out, it looks like we think, towards the back half of 2024. Now, keep in mind, anytime we have a federal agency that's going to be introducing a new rule, there's certain rules and norms that they have to follow. So in other words, they're going to have to post it up there for public comment and so forth. So God willing, this is not going to be a bolt out of the blue or anything like that. This is going to be something that we're getting notice on. And usually that comment process takes anywhere from 6 to 10 months, give or take. So we should probably see a rule drop maybe somewhere, I'm going to guess, if not Q4 this year, more likely just after Christmas, Q1 next year, and then rolling out into summer and beyond. But of course, during that process, the ATF's going to be looking to see what happens on all these different court challenges, which this channel has been covering extensively, Mock v. Garland and many others, because obviously they're going to be shaping their rule in response to all of that. But I just want to go into a little bit about what we're talking about more here. So as a reminder, you have the 1968 Gun Control Act, the GCA. The GCA basically set the broad framework down, not only for the very existence and implementation of the FFL system, that's the Federal Firearms Licensed. So if you derive your chief income from selling guns, then you need to have an FFL, okay? FFL means you become registered with the ATF and all that kind of stuff, although that's not the way it originally started, but now that's the way that works. So if you want to sell a firearm for profit, you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to go out, get your FFL. Keep in mind, it is illegal for you to purchase a firearm with the intention to resell it, okay? That's also a test. And again, there's exceptions to everything here, all right? But general broad strokes, that's another test for basically, do you need an FFL? And again, we have a fantastic video coming out on that later on this week. There's about 80,000 FFLs already in the United States as of 2023. I want to give you a few quotes, though, about this rule coming up from the New York Times article that announced it. The regulations, that's the ATF rule we're talking about, could set a threshold number of transactions that would define a dealer. Gun control groups hope to see it at 5 sales a year or lower. The rules will be backed up by a renewed push to prosecute businesses that refuse to register by accessing bank records, storage unit leases, and other expenses associated with running an off-the-books gun business, end quote. Again, that's from the New York Times. So in English, what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about the fact that, number one, is the government going to be expanding access to things like credit cards, bank accounts, all that kind of stuff. Because after all, when I say access, I'm not only talking about the raw metadata that maybe they're able to capture and to look at, but also what are going to be kind of the rules when it comes to pulling warrants and doing things like that as well. Because if you don't think that these sorts of ATF rulings, which, let's be clear, are not law, I know a lot of you are going to comment and say it's not law. I know it's not law. I'm very aware of the fact that this is not law. However, the law will respond to this sort of stuff by authorizing, whether legal or illegal remains to be seen, but by authorizing the use of warrants to be looking at all these things that was just mentioned in the article. Bank records, storage unit leases, and all this other kind of stuff. I would also include credit card purchases and other things as well. Interestingly enough, and this is really one of the big things I want to focus on here, the government is going to pick an arbitrary number, and the gun control crowd wants to see it lower the better. They want to see less than 5. And if you cross that number, so let's say if the number is 5, you sell 6 guns in a year, these don't have to be massive multi-$1,000 sales each. These could be less expensive entry-level market points. You sell 6 guns, you cross 5, that's 5 years prison and a $250,000 fine. Can you imagine if the government did this with another constitutional right? Let's take freedom of speech. Specifically, let's look at reading. Everyone needs to get a license and background check to buy and sell more than a certain number of books per year. Certain content, whether books or websites, that gets coded for being assault reading, that you're either restricted from accessing regardless of how many background checks you pass, or you're limited in the number that you're allowed to sell, browse, or share, let alone write. And after all, why not do this if we can do this for the Second Amendment? After all, if we are allowed to curb the Second Amendment to save lives, why can't we just do the same for the First Amendment? According to the National Institute for Justice in a 2022 study, many mass shooters are radicalized online. More than 1 in 5 mass shooters will use the internet and other sources to study previous mass shooters. So this is a serious question. If we're going to allow the change of the bedrock legal concepts of what makes the United States the United States, then the question begs itself, why stop at the Second Amendment? Where do we draw a line if we draw a line anywhere? We could possibly save even more lives by mandating government tracking on everybody's phones and computers to monitor all the content that we consume, and then create difficult algorithms that are complex to basically run risk assessments and so forth. At the end of the day, the question remains, what kind of nation do you want to live in? Moreover this, I'm a former state criminal prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. I employ upwards of 30 attorneys and started what is now the largest criminal defense firm in the state of Wisconsin. Every day, both myself and my attorneys handle phone calls from people who are in serious trouble with the law. Most will never become clients, but we still talk to them. I can tell you, the people committing the disproportionately large majority of the crimes, something that criminologists refer to as the law of crime concentration, where about 1.5% of the streets in the country account for more than 25% of the crime, including homicides, they won't care and won't stop because some ATF rule is out there. This is going to disproportionately impact harmless and law-abiding hobbyists and collectors who decided that they want to buy shotguns now, so they need to sell some of their rifles. This will disproportionately impact people of color and people who are lower income. Remember, wealthy folks, they don't need to sell guns to buy guns or to sell guns to cover an emergency car repair, a medical bill, a child being born, daycare costs, or whatever life event is out there. I know that when I had my first child, I had to sell almost half my gun collection in order to afford things like daycare, birthing, all that kind of stuff. I know I'm not the only one that had to do that a long time ago. The people that are going to be hurt by this are not the people who are purportedly being targeted. This is the way that gun laws work. They hurt a lot of good people who never should have been stuck with them, but they will be. As I say, judge a law, or in this case, an ATF rule, by its effect, not what some politician standing behind a microphone tells you is the intent. Guys, before I get to the 3 bottom line takeaways that I have in this video, as well as our always popular quote of the day, if you're just browsing through and found us, or if you're a longtime viewer, please help us out and help the algorithm help us out. Click like, tells us that you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it. We did a couple things a little differently in this video. I'd love to know that both by looking at your likes as well as reading your comments and feedback down below. If you want to seriously help our project out, please consider becoming a member. You get some extra perks, access to different things, as well as some live streams that we do and so forth. Thank you very much. Now let's get to the 3 takeaways. Number 1, it's unavoidable. Elections have consequences. Be sure to vote, or alternatively to be prepared to accept the consequences of not voting. And I perfectly understand that it feels hopeless, it feels helpless, it feels all those things, but I'm telling you, vote, get involved, and drag someone else who may not have been involved otherwise. Number 2, there are going to be a lot of good people who face serious time in prison because they never even heard about some ATF rule, because this isn't a bright line test law that the ATF is going to be developing a bright line test rule for. Of course, we'll see if they do that, but for right now, that's a really, really scary provision to be thinking about. And number 3, there's also going to be a lot of good people, whether they're hobbyists and collectors or just people who are lower income groups, who are statistically more likely to have to sell portions of their property in order to cover life events, who are going to be attacked by this and be facing very serious legal issues. And it will solve little or nothing when it comes to dealing with the folks who we're trying to really deal with here, the real bad guys. On to our quote of the day. This one comes from psychologist Carl Jung. Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. Thanks for sticking around this long. I will see you in the comment section. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.